Hi, I'm Scott Perry, Congressman Scott Perry, and I want to thank everybody for joining tonight's telephone town hall for all the constituents of Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District. I appreciate each of you for taking your time away from your family, maybe your dinner tonight, or whatever the plans you might have had to join us on the call and engage in a conversation about anything that's happening in our nation. And there's a lot going on right now. Anytime during the call, if you have a question for me, please just press *3. I don't have any guests tonight, so it's just me and you for the duration of our call. Let me just start with this. Entering tonight's call, let me just say that I'm heartbroken, I'm frustrated, angry, and I'm very sad. And I know that I'm not alone. I think our entire nation is hurting right now. George Floyd's murder at the hands of the Minneapolis police officers is quite honestly indefensible, period. It's disgusting, it's reprehensible, and I'm just not really sure if there are words that can adequately describe how wrong it is, especially perpetrated by those who took an oath and had the authority to know and to do better. With that, justice absolutely must be brought to Mr. Floyd and his entire family, and quite frankly, the entire nation. Each of us, we all have our part to play in our response to these events. This is our country, and we need to do whatever it takes to prevent it from being torn apart from the inside. Mr. Floyd's death has brought great and meaningful and peaceful protests and unity throughout the nation. In America, we have the constitutional right to peacefully protest, and these voices deserve to be recognized, and acknowledged, and heard. I'm 100% in support of these efforts. What we don't have the right to do is to use any situation for looting, destruction, and violence for personal gain. Quite honestly, setting a store on fire and taking a new TV is not addressing any situation, and it's negligent, it's selfish, and it's disgusting. It dishonors the exact cause of the protest to begin with, and it becomes nothing more than a riot. That's wrong. These individuals are committing crimes of opportunity and have no regard for the negative impact they're bringing to the very important message of those who peacefully protest and seek redress and want to have their voices heard in the name of justice. I pray for George Floyd, and I pray for his loved ones, his family. I pray for justice for the evil that was brought upon him. I guess all I can say is on behalf of those of us that know and do want to do better, I'm just very sorry. I guess moving on, over the past 3 months, COVID-19 has challenged each one of us. We've experienced a lot of losses. We've changed probably almost every structure and routine in our daily and personal and work lives. And it's taken a tremendous physical, mental, and emotional toll on our communities across the country. Nearly 43 million Americans have filed for unemployment during the pandemic, and many of the small businesses in our communities across the nation they're desperate for help, and many are unfortunately probably not going to come back. They just won't be able to. I am pleased to see that our state and counties are beginning to reopen. To me, it's the best way to begin moving forward and to allow us to get back to some semblance of our normal daily lives. Of course, we need to follow safety guidelines, but I still believe that we can do both. We've conquered a lot of things in America, and I think we can conquer this as well and live productive and regular lives in doing so. Now, this is just the beginning, I think, of our recovering from the pandemic, but I do look forward to answering your questions about the latest on the virus tonight, or anything else that you might have in mind, things that are happening in Congress, things that aren't happening, that type of thing. So I would just encourage you, if you have a question for me, to please dial *3. I have staff members on the line here who are going to give me the questions, so I don't see any of them. We will just take them as they come. Laura, do we have a question?
Yes, we do. Our first question is from John R.
Hey, John, this is Scott. What can I do for you, sir?
Hey, Scott. I'm a local real estate broker. I run 8 offices here in PA. and obviously, the pandemic has definitely impacted my offices. Most of my agents are on the PUA and the unemployment. And about a week ago, we had a meeting with Pennsylvania Association of Realtors and the director of unemployment and the head of labor and industry for the state of Pennsylvania. And they were queried as to how we're supposed to be reporting our income, and they were queried as to how long we could collect and the way that our income was calculated. And they gave us they gave us wrong information. I know it was wrong. I mean, they told us that things that we sold or we put under agreement before March 16th, we don't have to report, even if the agent got paid in April or May, against for their income. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that you can do to reach out to them to have an open conversation with the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors as to guidance. We don't want to break the law. We don't want to take anything that we're not entitled to, but at the same point in time, we're still struggling.
John, that's a great question, and I'm not sure where the disconnect may be. As a matter of fact, we did have the Secretary of Labor and the Director for Unemployment Compensation on a Tele-Town hall call very similar to this just a few weeks back, really as they were ramping up into this. And I know that it came quick and that there were a lot of unanswered questions, especially for folks just like your agents and brokers and many other folks that traditionally don't collect unemployment or can't collect unemployment. And I think the federal guidelines were fairly specific about that. And as far as I understood it, and look, there are going to be some technical difficulties and differences of opinion here, but it was based on previous year's wages and those type of things that were a little more concrete than trying to figure out if you had a sale a month or two before and then it went to settlement and you finally got your commission and whether that counted or not. I think it'd be very hard to adjudicate that, which is why we were looking at previous year's income or at least, a certain amount of months income prior to if you were a new hire or something like that. Now, I can certainly encourage the secretary and the director to get back with the Realtors Association, but I would also say, John, that we can try and answer some of these questions for you and help collaborate with you individually or the Realtors Association directly through our office to Governor Wolf's administration and the folks there to make sure that we get this stuff documented and that we make sure that everybody's following the guidelines. Certainly, I agree with you. Nobody wants to break the law, but you're struggling, and that's why we put these programs in place so that we dealt with the incident where literally the government took your livelihood away from you for a period of time. And I do consider that a taking. And if the government's taking, then the government needs to compensate you for that taking. So we just want to get it right. John, if I could, I would ask you, and we'll take note on the call here that you called, but I would ask you to call my office and coordinate with us if we could, and we'll see if we can make sure that everybody's on the same page here between the federal legislation and the programs and then how they're being administered by the state, by the Department of Labor and the Unemployment Compensation Office. Does that sound reasonable to you?
I'll call in tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I sure appreciate it. It's a great question. We absolutely want to get that right because we want to make sure your folks are taken care of, but we don't want anybody to be concerned that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing or that, sometime 6 months, a year down the road, the IRS or somebody else is calling up or sending them a letter saying, we intend to levy or collect funds that you weren't deserving of. Nobody needs that, right? So we definitely need to avoid those kind of things, but we want to make sure that the program is working as it was designed and that there's no question about that. So I sure appreciate it if you would do that, John, and I thank you for the question. Again, for everybody who's listening, anything's on the table. If you want to ask a question, dial *3. Laura, do we have another question?
The next question is from Destiny B.
All right, Destiny, go ahead. This is Scott.
Hi. I just wanted to congratulate you first on the primary election, on your winning. Hello?
Okay, well yes, ma'am. I hear you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
My question was, what can be done about these individuals who are on Facebook and they're doing the George Floyd challenge, and they're on there and they have their knee on a person's neck, and yeah, it's awful, and it's called the George Floyd challenge, and I'm like, I clicked the button to state that I felt it was, I didn't even know what to click, but it just had little buttons there to click to just report that it was something that should not be done. And that was one of my questions. And my other question is, we see the harassment that's done out in the street, but what about the harassment that's done inside of the prisons behind the walls? And that's not getting addressed. And a lot of times individuals that are in there are afraid. They're afraid to tell on somebody because they're afraid that, what's going to be taken from me, or they, we feel like it's like toilet paper right now is like, oh my God, like a piece of steak. But I mean, to them, it's a value. I mean, and if when they're in there, they take their toilet paper, their eating time. So what is going to be done in that situation?
Okay, Destiny, I just want to clarify something with you so I can make sure I understand the question correctly. The second one regarding the prison harassment. Are you saying prison harassment of prisoners by staff and by guards or by other prisoners? Staff and guards.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, absolutely, and I think unfortunately that when prisoners there, they might be not treated with the same rights and respect as every human and the dignity. We understand they broke the law and they're prisoners, but that doesn't give anybody fair license of abuse or anything like that. And unfortunately, I suspect that the system doesn't allow for very much justice, so to speak, within that system, right? You're a prisoner, and so you're a second-class citizen, so to speak. That's maybe how you're treated among the staff. So in answering that question, I would say this. I think the best thing to do there would be either contact, depends on the prison level. So if it's a state prison, you would contact your state representative. And when I say that, when I say you, Destiny, I mean probably the prisoner's family member, because if it's coming from the prisoner, him or herself, then there's going to be a question of whose constituent they are. They might be in the prison in the jurisdiction of that representative, but yet their actual home of record residence is elsewhere. You just don't want to get caught up in that. So you, as the constituent of the elected representative, could contact and should contact your representative on the state level for state issues. Contact me or your United States Senator for federal issues, and go ahead and let us know what's happening to your loved one who's in the prison, and then we can make the inquiry. I think that's the best way to make sure that those kind of things are kept in check, because I think that there is just a natural tendency to overlook them from within the system. And I'm not I think we do have a very good prison system. The Secretary Wetzel, I think, does an excellent job, but everybody's human and mistakes are made, and so we just have to make sure the checks and balance system is in place. Regarding the George Floyd challenge, I must lament to you, Destiny, I haven't heard of that. I just think that's horrifically disrespectful. Now, I'm assuming it's on Facebook or YouTube or something like that. Those habitually have been platforms, so that's just the Facebook or YouTube is the conduit, so to speak, by which people express themselves. If people express themselves in that manner of disrespect, I suppose it's their choice, but it sure isn't. It sure isn't laudable, or we certainly wouldn't advise that you do that. That having been said, if they're doing something unlawful in this George Floyd challenge, then the authorities could be contacted in that regard. And I hope they're not doing that. And but we just got to. I think at that point we got to kind of count on our better angels to say. And look, each of us can do our part to say, look, that's really disrespectful. That's really dishonorable, and I'd appreciate it if you would engage in that. I mean, I think that does have some impact. That if enough people say those kind of things, that we respect everybody's right to their own personal voice, and they have a constitutional right to voice their own opinions. But some things are just abhorrent and unnecessary and disrespectful. I hope that answers your question and my position on that, Destiny, and I sure appreciate it. Again, dial *3 if you have a question. Laura, do we have another question in the queue?
The next question is from Greg J.
Hey, Greg, you're on the line. What can I do for you? This is Scott.
Hey, Scott. How you doing today?
I'm well, sir. What's on your mind?
Well, my question is around utilizing just CDC guidelines rather than going to private healthcare providers who seem to be having a different opinion about the need to really lock down businesses and, in reopening schools, businesses. We own some commercial properties, and our tenants are struggling to know that there's going to be so onerous guidelines. They're concerned about losing their license to do business, as Governor Wolf has threatened before. And yet across the country, there are many physicians that disagree with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, who probably haven't seen a patient in 10 to 20 years. I've talked to the local coroner here in Cumberland County where the deaths are coming from, and so there seems to be lots of contradictions as far as guidelines, and yet the guidelines are being instituted, and it seems only with government feedback, not private medical providers. Any thought on that?
Yeah, that is a great point, and Greg, I understand your frustration, and we've all kind of been dealing with the frustration of inconsistency since this started. And while we might, disagree with the policy, whether it's CDC or State Department of Health, it'd be great if it were at least consistent. Now, from my standpoint, I think that the best thing to do for all of us is just to comply with CDC guidelines, because that's a nationwide guideline. I've talked to people from across the country. Other places are doing things completely differently than we are here in Pennsylvania. Literally, I have some of my boss's constituents that have left the state to go to other places, at least temporarily, so that they can feel like they, have a different sense of normalcy, so to speak, because they understand and they know that, the guidelines are different wherever they're going. I think that's really potentially problematic. Unfortunately, the CDC provides the guideline. Whether the state, the county, some department wishes to enforce it or follow it is, unfortunately in this case, up to them. They can. I think generally speaking, how it goes is you can't do less than that, but it's up to you if you want to do more than that. And that's how the approach has kind of been taken. But I do think that it's appropriate that your comment about taking some other input into the CDC. Now, it's my understanding that CDC does that, and maybe I don't know exactly what their process is in receiving that input before they put out information. My frustration has been that, among other things, that even the CDC guidance seems to change on a pretty regular basis, where they say it absolutely has to be this, and then later on they say, well, that really wasn't doing anything, and you don't know, and if somebody else doesn't get the word, they're back on, the old standard and not the new standard, and then they're looking at you like you're not following the guidelines, and so on and so forth. All I can do in that regard, Greg, is to continue. What I have done is to ask the state administration, the governor and the state administration, to follow CDC guidelines as opposed to coming up with their own set that's not congruent, especially for places along, like, we border Maryland, New Jersey, New York. I mean, if you're traveling across the border, it's very, very difficult to comply. You might not have equipment, so you can't get into a store or something like that. And so I've requested that. I will continue to request it, but I will. I have got a call with Health and Human Services coming up, and I will impart to them the need to get well, first of all, I'll ask their process to ensure that they are getting outside input, and then I'll try and understand that. And Greg, if you want to call back, I can kind of give you an update on asking that question on your behalf. But if they're not doing that, I would certainly encourage them to do that and to give them some examples. I know it is very, very frustrating for you. The other thing that we're very concerned about in that regard is potential liability exposure based on different sets of guidelines and businesses that want to open, that want to do the right thing, but have competing guidelines that they're trying to comply with, and then having someone come in and saying that they were negligent, and then opening themselves up to that risk. That absolutely has to be addressed. We are looking at addressing that in Congress very shortly. I don't know exactly where it stands, but we are looking to address that very shortly, because we understand that is a problem, and it is a problem to be addressed. What I do understand about that is it will be pandemic/COVID-19 specific. There will probably be a timeline set with that legislation that it applies just to this circumstance. It will not be long-range, broad, sweeping changes to liability for personal or business, but that is part of the equation. So I know that I probably didn't provide you a lot of relief in that answer, Greg. I'm sorry. As a legislator, I just can't force these things to happen, but I'm going to continue to do what I can to be your voice and to make sure that your concerns are heard at the state level and the federal level. And like I said, if you want me to follow up with you after my conversation with Health and Human Services at the federal level, I'll be happy to do that. So thanks for the question. Laura, is there, again, dial *3 if you have a question. Laura, is there another question online?
Our next question is from Delinda H.
Oh,
is it Delinda or Belinda? Go ahead.
it's Delinda with a D.
Okay. Hey, Delinda, what can I do for you? This is Scott.
Hi, Scott. First, not the reason for my call, my call-in, but first I want to thank John for his question. I'm also a realtor in Central Pennsylvania, and I cannot stress enough, this is not just a John question. We all have these questions. So if you could absolutely follow up with the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors, I know we would all greatly appreciate it. So thank you. Thank John.
Okay.
My question, though, tonight is, I would like to understand your position, your reaction, your thoughts on President Trump's reaction to George Floyd's death this week. His behavior this week has escalated. I'm a registered Republican. I'm judge of elections for my voting precinct. At this point in time, I'm embarrassed to be a Republican, to be quite frank with you. From the point of him tear gassing citizens this week to threatening military force on citizens who absolutely, the rioters, that's a no-brainer. They should not be doing that. But the peaceful citizens, he does not have the constitutional right to bring out the military against citizens of this country. And I'm tired, and I'm risking my reputation as a realtor for somebody who doesn't agree with me on this call. But I am sick and tired of people making excuses for him. It is time that people in the Republican Party stand up and have a voice against what he is doing. Forgive me, I'm muted.
No, I understand, and I appreciate your passion for the issue. First of all, let me just start with this. I think that unfortunately, if you're speaking specifically regarding his visit to the Episcopal Church adjacent to the White House, I just want to inform everybody that there was no tear gas used, there was no rubber bullets used, and the military was not used. And so, if those are reports that you're hearing, and certainly those are very strong. That invokes a strong response, as it should. But those reports are just patently, unfortunately, false. The curfew was invoked by Washington, D.C., not by the Park Police, and the Park Police and the Secret Service is actually who deals with the White House grounds and adjacent areas. They are not the military, and through them with Mayor Bachelor of Washington, D.C., they invoked a curfew. The curfew was invoked, and it was to begin on that evening in 15 minutes. The crowd was asked 3 times to move aside for the movement of the president as the president moves anywhere. That's standard protocol. When the president moves, whether you're out on the street in some town far away or whether you're in Washington, D.C., they clear the streets for security. It's just normal protocol, not for President Trump, but for any president. And in response to that, there were bottles of frozen water and bricks and those kind of things thrown and so on and so forth. And so they moved the crowd back, but they did not use tear gas and they did not use rubber bullets, and that was not the military. So in response to that, look, I get that emotions are running high, and I understand that would be a reasonable response to someone that used that kind of force in the face of peaceful demonstrations as constitutionally protected. Unfortunately, that's just simply not the case. And so, when I think the president's wrong, I'm happy to say that. I've disagreed with him publicly on numerous occasions, but in this case, I just think, unfortunately, the information that is being purveyed is not accurate, and that's unfortunate. But I think that's just the reality of the circumstance. And you're, Delinda, you're certainly welcome to fact check me on that. And if you need me or my office to get you the information where we got it from, which was the Park Police and Secret Service, I'm absolutely happy to do that. So appreciate the question and the opportunity to answer it. Again, Dial and Delinda, we will work with you and John and the realtors to get those answers for you. With that, dial *3 if you have a question. This is Scott, and do you have another question, Laura, in the queue?
The next question comes from Joseph B.
Joseph, are you on the line?
Yep, I'm here.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm a business owner in Hershey, and I haven't received any funding or anything. I filled out the PPP. I did find out today that the maximum that my business is eligible for is $2,268. And I think that's kind of funny, being that pretty much doesn't even cover 1 month worth of rent and utilities. Trying to figure out if there are any other programs available. I was denied unemployment personally. I actually had to pick up a third shift job, and I don't want to lose my business.
Yeah. Joseph, let me ask you this: for PPP, you went through your local bank, I'm assuming, for that. Is that correct? Or
yeah, I actually went through them today, and they told me what the requirements were. So
yeah. Now, when you said you went through that with them today, this is today the day you filed, or had you filed previously and now just today found out that you were approved for that amount?
Well, back in March, I had applied online with the SBA.gov, and I hadn't heard anything from them. So people were telling me to just keep waiting, and I pretty much did. Boy.
Yeah, I wish you would have contacted the office. Yeah, I wish you would have contacted our office, but look, that's all water over the dam at this point. The way it's supposed to work, of course, you're supposed to go to PPP. You're supposed to go to your local bank or a local bank. Well, it doesn't have to be local, but to a bank, and they have you fill out the application, and of course your request for the amount is based on the income that has been lost, and so I'm curious about the amount, because it sounds like a very low amount, for a business that's been shuttered since March. But, I'm not necessarily going to question that right now. But what we can do is try and validate some of this stuff with you through the bank and the SBA, Joe, if you can call in. And also, I'm concerned about your unemployment compensation. We passed pandemic unemployment assistance at the federal level specifically for self-employed individuals for like yourself. Now that is administered at the state level, and quite honestly, in defense of the state, it was kind of thrown in their laps, and they had to set up a system to deal with it, and they did that fairly quickly. And now it's never quick enough when you don't have an income and you're waiting on money. Let me say that too. But that having been said, it seems to me that you would qualify for that. And are you saying that you applied for that unemployment compensation at the state and were denied? Is that what you're saying, Joe?
Correct. And then I didn't have any other options other than to run and get a third shift job. So
can you tell me when you applied? When did you apply for unemployment compensation?
Probably in April.
Okay, April. Applied in April. Yeah. Okay. I want you to do me a favor because it depends on when you applied in April. It was April fairly early. I hate to say it in the grand scheme of this system, and the unemployment compensation office at the state level just might not have been prepared to receive your claim. And so, without any malice, they might have just denied your claim because they didn't have the system set up and they didn't have any choice but to do that. Joseph,
well,
I would like you to call
now, though, because I actually have a third shift job now.
Yeah, well, because even if you have a third shift job now, you had lost your income back then, and so you might not be able to apply for unemployment compensation now, Joseph, because you're working now, but you were not working then, and so you will be able to apply for the period of time where you were not working and not receiving a paycheck. And so, like I said, you might not be able to be compensated now because you have a job or two jobs or three jobs, but you should be able to receive compensation for the period of time that you were unemployed. What I'd like you to do, Joseph, is to call our office and talk to one of my constituent service folks, walk them through what you did, the timeline, and so on and so forth, and let us see if we can work something out and advocate on your behalf with unemployment and with SBA through the PPP, and just make sure everything is on the up and up there.
Okay, definitely. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what we do. So please just contact the office, and we will see if we can run that down for you. Okay. Thank you very much for the call, Joseph. Is there something else? Okay. All right. Dial *3 if you have a question. Sorry, dropped the phone there. Dial *3 if you have a question. And Laura, is there another question on the line?
The next question is from Lynn F.
Hi, Lynn. What can I do for you? This is Scott.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for doing these calls. And I don't mean to be light of all the events happening, but I have my own, just like that other realtor had her opinion. I'm a former New Yorker, and I worked in the city in the 80s and commuted from Long Island. And I see my home's destroyed. I have family there. My question is, I personally feel like a lot of this is pent-up frustration from people being told what to do. In our free society, we're quite spoiled. We're used to taking control of our lives. And I think there's a lot of pent-up frustration. And I'm not downplaying the racial thing at all. I lived through civil rights. I lived through busing. I have taken Black young men in my home and helped them get on their feet. But I really think that this was just, I don't understand how people are allowed to do this, and yet I can't get a haircut. And I know that that's been all over the news too. So my question is, I know at the beginning, and I might have my understanding of how everything worked wrong, but originally when President Trump, who I think is doing a fabulous job, no president has ever had to go through what he's gone through. And he's a New Yorker, so I understand how he talks. And I think that's why he got elected. That being said, I know he wouldn't do tear gas. He's caring too much. And no president wants to die with the memory of something awful like that happening. So if they believe the fake news, do your fact checking. So that being said, he originally said that he was declaring this a war state so that he could get ventilators built and I guess stand up to the private sector and make them do what he needed them to do on a grand scale. Now, we were supposed to, they scared us to death for those 2 weeks over Holy Week and Easter, that we shouldn't go out of the house, and they led us to believe that this was just going to be for a few weeks. Then every governor could do whatever they want. My question is, are we still in this act of war, that state of war, whatever you call it, where these governors can tell us what to do? Because I feel like at this point, and I understand that they don't know a lot about this virus, but right now, a lot of people are not wearing masks and they're not social distancing, but protesters could go and the governor can go in a parade and they're not 6 feet apart. And then the hoodlums and the evil can come out in society and trash our homes and our cities and ruin more of our economy and put more people out of work. Just so, I mean, I know this is very political. This is very political. I want to get back to my life. I want to know if I have a right to go get a haircut. I paid $100 for my hairdresser to come to my house. I'm a senior citizen. I'm on a limited budget. But I can't cut my own hair, and I'm not walking around with it half white and half brown. I'm sorry, I'm very vain. So, and senators get their haircuts. They all look good on TV. So I want to know, do they have a legal right to say we can't do certain things at this stage of the game with this virus?
All right, Lynn, thanks so much for the question, and I sure can feel your frustration, and I completely empathize with where you are. Let me just say this: there's not a state of war, but there was an emergency declared at the federal level for the pandemic. Now, the reason to declare the emergency, quite honestly, is it allows the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, certain latitudes, and it opens up a tranche of money to send to the states to use for different things, whether it's ventilators, whether it's PPE, you name it. All that stuff is opened up with a state of emergency for the pandemic, and that's what was declared. Now, the president did use the Defense Authorization Act to get certain companies to produce ventilators, because at the time it was thought that we were going to be in a shortage of ventilators and we needed a whole lot of them to be produced very quickly. And he invoked that on a couple occasions, once with GM, as I'm sure you're aware. With that, each state's governors decided whether they were going to invoke something similar or not. And there are states that did, and there are states that did not. In our state, there is a state of emergency for the pandemic that has been declared, or a disaster declaration that has given the administration, the governor, certain plenary powers, as we call them, which are overriding powers to determine how we will and will not do things. And under those provisions, the administration, the governor, has said that if you live at this place or you do this type of thing, you may or may not conduct that business. So, for instance, if you have a restaurant in Cumberland or Dauphin or your county right now, you're not allowed to have inside seating and serve constituents there. Same things with the barber, the hairdresser, the nail salon, the eyelashes, etc. They are not allowed to open and receive clients right now until the governor releases them from this order, and unfortunately, it's under penalty of loss of their license. So, while I don't think that I've seen where the governor has arrested, say, a barber or a restaurateur for opening their business. What they have done is pulled their license to operate, or maybe their whatever license is associated with the business that they have, and then there might be associated penalties with that. That, Lynn, I think is probably going to be an issue for the courts over time. I find that I have some disagreement with how this has been administered. I have tried my level best to work within the system that we have to seek redress, calling on the governor to do things differently, supporting those that have had a disagreement with the governor, openly. I have done those things, but I have tried to work within the system that we have to do that. Unfortunately, under these current circumstances, we have been unable to bring the governor to the table to have a conversation about this and about the way things are being administered and adjudicated. I guess while we have all suffered through this, the good news is that I think that shortly we will be most of us will be in the green phase, so to speak, and that will allow most of these things to start reoccurring with some caveats. I don't think it's optimal. I think it's gone on way too long. I think that it has been inconsistent, and there has been some hypocrisy, as you have noted, Lynn. What I want to do as a lawmaker is not be the guy that tells you one thing and does another, right? I don't want to tell you to abide by the law and then go out and break the law myself. And so I can't advise you to do that. But I sense your frustration, and I want to let you know that I have worked very diligently, including today, to try and change this circumstance, to make it move more quickly and more efficiently than I think it has, because I think it has punished far too many people. I would characterize our situation. I have done this in our state. Unfortunately, we are forcing our elderly folks into homes where they're exposed to COVID-19, and we are forcing our healthy people into bankruptcy. Right now the number looks like about 80% of our deaths in Pennsylvania are occurring in nursing homes, retirement facilities, assisted living facilities, and that 80% death rate number is being used to imperil the rest of our citizens from a living their life standpoint, and to restrict them greatly. I just don't think it's it's been very successful, and that's my position on it. So, Lynn, I wish I could do more for you more quickly. Unfortunately, I'm going to abide by the law, and I would encourage everybody else to do the same thing. But I would also encourage you to seek redress I know the state legislature has been passing. They have been in the whole time. They have been in session. They have been passing bills. They have been trying to get the governor to come to the table to relent on some of this stuff, but he has been unrelenting. And again, they too are working within the mechanisms of a civil society that they have to try and get him to do that. But he's unwilling to do that. There are few consequences or few other ways to do that. Hearing from you, Lynn, to the governor directly, I think is an important step. And while it might not change things in the immediate future, I think it is important that the governor hears your point of view. I sure appreciate you, and I wish I could give you a better answer than that. Again, dial *3 if you have a question. Laura, do we have another one on the line?
Our next question is from Gary E.
Hey, Gary. This is Scott Perry. What can I do for you, sir?
Good evening, Congressman. How you doing?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
Oh, we're doing lovely. Good to talk with you. But I have kind of like a two-part question. Number one being my wife and I are sincerely dissatisfied with Governor Wolf's handling of this pandemic in Pennsylvania, primarily being the nursing home issues. My wife's father's in a nursing home. He's 93 years old. And it's my understanding that Dr. Rachel Levine actually pulled her mother out of a nursing home and put her in a hotel. That's my understanding. And also I understand there's 57% or 80% of the cases were in fact nursing homes. And I just feel as if that's the way Governor Wolf and Dr. Rachel Levine handled this is totally wrong. They weren't, as far as I'm concerned, they weren't transparent enough regarding nursing homes, and it's a great concern of my wife and I both. That's your question.
Well, Gary, I will tell you, I have tried to give the governor deference in this occasion, in this circumstance, because I think at the onset there wasn't a lot that we did know, and action needed to be taken, and so I can appreciate the position that he was in without a whole lot of information, and so I have tried to be less than critical. But at some point, it seemed to me, just in comparing the Commonwealth to other states, that we had taken the wrong position on this, and we were really imperiling our elderly citizens. And as you know, Gary, we have Pennsylvania has a very high elderly citizen population. And the one thing we knew about COVID-19 in the onset of this, we didn't know a lot, but the one thing that we did know was that elderly people and people with what we call comorbidities or other health conditions were at great risk, at great peril of contracting COVID-19, and then there was a very high mortality rate for elderly citizens that did contact it. That's what we knew going in. Yet the governor's policy, in case folks don't know it, the governor's policy through the Secretary of Health, Levine, is that nursing homes, elder care facilities, assisted living facilities that have that maybe send a patient or a resident as a patient to a hospital who then is COVID positive, the hospital then sends them back to the nursing home, elder care facility, assisted living facility, et cetera. And those facilities are bound by the governor's edict to take those people back in. Now, what we don't want, of course, is those people out on the street. But in talking to the state legislature, the administration was given options to handle and to take care of that very specific set of the population that was elderly and had contracted COVID without sending them back to those facilities and imperiling everyone else in those facilities. And Gary, your numbers are correct. I just checked before the call. It ranges between 79 and 88% of Pennsylvania fatalities due to COVID-19 occurred with a nursing home or an elder care facility. Now, you might see a different number from the administration because what they're not counting in that number is the people that reside at the nursing home that contracted COVID-19 but then died in the hospital. It's my position that you don't readmit COVID positive patients into a population of very susceptible and vulnerable individuals. That is a derelict policy, and it still exists at this moment, which is why I've called for a federal investigation. And the other reason I've called for a federal investigation is because while this policy exists, our state attorney general has stated that he is pursuing or is considering the pursuit of charging some of these nursing homes with murder for these deaths. And I find that to be just unacceptable. The nursing homes were forced to take these patients. At the same time, the federal government, through FEMA and through direct legislative action, provided the state with funding, with equipment, with facilities, et cetera, and those facilities, those monies, those things were never sent to the nursing homes that were forced to take these COVID-19 patients. And we heard over and over again from these facilities, they were begging for help. And of course, at the federal level, we'd send it, but we sent it to the states to administer to their populations because we know that that they would know best. And unfortunately, to me, this is a horrifically failed policy. And and I think that it is, again, the height of hypocrisy that the Secretary of Health would move her mother out of the nursing facility where other people don't have the financial ability to do that, or maybe they weren't even aware of the circumstance that their loved one was placed in by this action of the state administration. So Gary, I'm right there where you are. I am pushing hard for this because I think that Pennsylvanians need to know what happened here and where the accountability needs to be addressed. And so I don't think we're unfortunately going to get it at the state level, which is why I've asked for a federal investigation, just so that we can call the balls and strikes without any undue political influence to cover somebody's kind of rear end or decision making that after the fact turned out to be less than optimal. Appreciate your time and your call, Gary. Again, dial *3 if you have a question. Laura, is there another question on the line?
Our next question is from Rachel H.
Hey, Rachel, this is Scott Perry. What can I do for you?
Hi, Congressman. Several, well, I'll say at least two federal officials have suggested in the past week or so the deployment of active duty military to regulate, I guess, the conduct of protesters. First, the president, and then yesterday, Senator Tom Cotton wrote an op-ed to that point in the New York Times. So my question for you is, do you support the use of active duty military to regulate the conduct of American citizens protesting on American soil?
Absolutely not, and there's no reason to do that. I'll have to look at what Senator Cotton said. I suspect, and I'm just speculating here, but knowing that Senator Cotton and his military service, that he is not looking, and to be clear here, what I think we're all talking about is the Insurrection Act, just in case anybody wants to take a look at what that provides for. It does provide for the use of the United States military in very specific cases. It has been used in the past in the United States on multiple occasions, but it is not, and let me be clear here, it is absolutely not to be used to regulate or to impose itself on protesting. Protesting is a constitutional protected right. What I think that the concern is that the protests have been used by folks that have something else in mind, which is political inflammation of the circumstances to achieve a different goal, so to speak. And so when it comes to rioting, when it comes to physical violence, when it comes to injury or loss of life, destruction of structures, and widespread rioting and chaos in cities, we leave that to states and mayors and city and state administrators to deal with. When they won't do it, when they refuse to do it for one reason or another, there's a greater concern when you have, I don't know, upwards of 140 or 150 cities across the country experiencing the very same thing at the very same time, when we know that there's a coordination so that incendiary devices are placed where bricks, pallets, I've seen literally pallets of bricks placed. If you've ever placed a pallet of bricks somewhere, that's no mean feat. You better have a forklift or a skid. You better have some kind of machine or a lot of time to move a pallet of bricks. They're heavy and they don't move easily. And the fact that they are placed in places leads one to believe pretty easily that there's a coordinated effort. When cities refuse to protect life and property for one reason or another, somebody has to do that. You can't just let lawlessness and destruction and loss of life occur. So it is not taken lightly. It is not meant in any shape or form to impose upon protesting, which is a constitutionally guaranteed right. What is not a constitutionally guaranteed right is violence and destruction of other people's property or their lives or life or limb, so to speak. That is not constitutionally protected under any circumstances, and so you just can't allow for those type of things to occur without abating them. And I think that is the interest in invoking, if necessary, and only when necessary, and as a last resort, the tenets of the Insurrection Act. But that's a difference. And I also want to, let me just take this opportunity, Rachel, if I may, to talk about the National Guard, which is not included, which would come into play or can come into play prior to invocation of the Insurrection Act. The National Guard can be called by the state's governors to assist and aid in law enforcement. However, they are not law enforcement officers, and as members of the uniformed military services, cannot perform law enforcement duties. However, they can operate in support of law enforcement in cases of public unrest and, again, in violence, destruction, so on and so forth. they are not to be used in cases of peaceful protesting. There would be absolutely no reason to use them, and I don't think that they have been used in those circumstances anywhere that I know of. But that's the difference between those things, and I sure appreciate the question. I know that, again, that passions run high, opinions are very strident about these things, as they should be, but it's important to have all the information so that we're completely clear about what we're speaking about here. And I do appreciate the question, the opportunity. Thank you, Rachel. Laura, is there another question? And go ahead and dial *3 if you have a question, because we'd love to hear from you.
The next question comes from James E.
Hey, Jane, this is Scott Perry. What can I do for you, ma'am? Are you there, Jane?
The caller is James E.
James Ackman, E-C-K-M-A-N.
Oh, okay, James. Okay, go ahead, James.
Well, it's funny. I do have a follow-up question on what you just answered. Is Congress going to do something about the? I know the president has considered them a terrorist organization, Antifa, but I see, from what I see, from what I'm gathering, most of these riots are breaking out in Democratic states, and the governors are not doing a darn thing about it. What is Congress going to do to deal with these people?
Well, James, and I apologize for getting your name wrong. I got a little bit of hearing issues of my time in the military, but Congress can have hearings, so to speak, to investigate these things, but understand we are legislators, right? So we are not investigators, and we are not implementers of the law. We create the law, and then it's up to the executive branch to implement and execute, so to speak, the law. So I have been concerned about Antifa for a long period of time. I formerly served on the Homeland Security Committee and had a lot of interest and concern and questions regarding Antifa and our actions as a government regarding Antifa. The president has called for the designation of for them as a terrorist organization. I think you saw that over the weekend. The National Security Director and the Attorney General have made similar statements. My question and concern in that regard is that what we're used to is a designation as a foreign terrorist organization, like Hamas or Hezbollah or the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So those are foreign. What I'm not clear on is if there is such a thing as a domestic terrorist organization, and what allowances there would be if there was such a designation. And so I've been trying to find that out since I heard the president's comments. I've been working on that through Homeland Security and my staff. I will tell you this: I think that Antifa is a dangerous organization, and if people aren't familiar, Antifa stands for the anti-fascist actions, anti-fascism. So it sounds like you should be for Antifa if you are opposed to fascism, right? So that's why they're named that. They have their origins in Nazi Germany because the anti-fascists were opposed to Adolf Hitler. What the other side of the story is that the anti-fascists are pro-communist. So they were anti-Hitler, but they were pro-Stalin. And so in many cases, if you look at what they stand for, it is the downfall of the American government and and quite generally insurrection. And so my concern is that they are operating and have been operating unabated for a very long time now. And then unfortunately, while we're trying to honor the memory of George Floyd and see if we can have some good come out of that as a result of his horrific murder, that they have used these peaceful protests as human shields to conduct violence and insurrection around many of these cities. So I think that in talking to some of the intelligence agencies over the last week, and some of the federal administrative staff that they're going to be trying to designate in some way Antifa so that investigations can occur. The investigations would include things like how they receive their financing, what is the chain of command, who sets up the bail bond situation in these cities for the Antifa members who are arrested and then immediately released back out on the streets, who set up the supply chain of incendiary devices and the frozen water bottles, the bricks, etc. Who are these folks, and try and understand what is happening with Antifa, who's running it, and where the accountability lies. So I know that that's maybe a new name, a new word for a lot of folks, but I've given you kind of like the 30-second kind of 101 on Antifa, and it's my opinion right now that there's increased scrutiny as is appropriate in our country regarding Antifa from the Trump administration, and I am in approval of that, and I am urging that they do that for everybody's health, safety, and the sake of our country. Thank you, James. I sure appreciate the question. Dial *3 if you have a question. Laura, is there another question on the line?
Our last question for tonight is coming from Warren B.
Hey, Warren.
Hi,
this is
Scott.
Perry. Yes, sir.
Scott,
what can I do for you?
Warren Buellette, thank you for all your good work. I wanted to talk to you about what you see Congress doing about China's rise to power.
Wow, Warren, that's a really open-ended question. Of course, I have been a China hawk, Warren, as you know, for my entire existence, I think, as long back as I can remember. Unfortunately, our own federal government has told us for almost my whole life that China was a strategic competitor and not a strategic enemy. We had hoped for the best with China. We had hoped with their entry into the World Trade Organization that free markets and free thinking and democratic societies would and the free flow of information would inform their population to overthrow or to diminish the capabilities and the iron grip of the Communist Party of China. Unfortunately, over 40 years, that has not happened. As a matter of fact, it has only gotten worse. And during that time, we have ceded a whole lot of our sovereignty to China, whether it's through our supply chains for medicines or just allowing, quite honestly, the wholesale theft of military and national security property, as well as industrial privately held property in this country. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, the Wuhan virus, whatever you want to call it, has opened up most of Americans' eyes to the Communist Chinese Party, which is wholly separate from the Chinese people that unfortunately have to live under the yoke of their party. And we're seeing them trying to take over Hong Kong right now and disregard the agreement that they made with Great Britain when the UK turned over Hong Kong to the Chinese government. That all having been said, Warren, there are numerous pieces of legislation. I have half a dozen of my own right now to recognize Taiwan, to disallow China's involvement in the World Health Organization. You name it. We are, as you know, the president. Maybe you don't know that we were, as a country, we were about ready to allow our markets, and particularly the thrift savings plan. The thrift savings plan, for people that are listening that might not know, is the savings plan that federal employees save their retirement money in. It's also the savings plan that uniformed military services save their money in. The thrift savings plan administered by the federal government was going to invest in China to the tune of billions and billions of hundreds of billions of dollars. The president just ended that possibility, and it was about ready to happen. So we were very concerned about that. Literally paying to finance. You had military members in the United States that were in their retirement accounts paying to finance the weapons that would be used to fight them in a potential conflict with China. So I think you're going to see a very different viewpoint in Congress, Warren, moving forward. Now, these bills, a lot of these bills existed in the past, but they would never even get out of committee because Americans apparently didn't want to anger the Chinese as a strategic competitor. But the more and more as they're seen as what they are, and that's the Communist Chinese Party as a strategic adversary, I think you're going to see a whole lot of things changing very rapidly. We're going to try and pull much of our supply chains back to the United States or to trusted partners that believe in democratic principles and free markets, which is not the Communist Chinese Party. It's going to take a little longer than we hope, Warren, and especially on the information technology side and the social media side. If you're familiar with Huawei, they continue to undercut all the competition in the free world such that they've driven most of that competition out of business. And now that they're one of the only countries providing 5G, but the United States government is getting involved, and we're going to incentivize free market countries and free market businesses to perfect and to scale that technology for the United States and our allies, so that we're not dependent on Chinese infrastructure to run our information across, because as we know, it will definitely be compromised. That's just a very short narrative on China. I do think, just as an aside, that China should be held responsible for what they've done with COVID-19, and I'm happy to talk to any of my constituents, my bosses, about that, but I'm very clear on the origins of the virus and the actions of the Communist Chinese government that imperiled the whole world, including the United States of America. That having been said, listen, it is my grand honor to serve as your voice in Congress. I know that sometimes we might not agree on things, but I'm always open to your opinion, and I will absolutely listen. So I hope that if you have an issue or concern, that you would contact my office, and that we will do what we can to help you. For issues with PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, or unemployment compensation, we will need to talk to you individually, right? Because we can't have your information all across the, we don't want to broadcast that to everybody that's listening. So if we have your number, we will call you. But if we don't have your number, I just want to encourage you to call us, because we want these programs to work for your benefit. I don't want people sitting and waiting, thinking, well, I might hear something next week or something. Don't leave it to chance. Call the office. Let us start a case file for you. Let us inquire on your behalf. Let us make sure you receive the compensation for what has been taken from you by the government's actions. But with that, I sure appreciate you. It's a privilege and an honor to serve. And with that, stay safe out there, and I wish you God's blessing. Good evening.